Okay. Folks are still hopping on, but I think we can go ahead and just get started. So good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on another Wednesday morning for the Advocate Virtual Forum. We're going to take some time today to discuss the very, I don't know if unique is a word for the 2020 General Assembly, or unprecedented, or I'm sure that Terry is going to have much better adjectives than I am for what this session was like, and look ahead to 2021 during these kind of uncertain times. Some Zoom housekeeping. Video or the audio will be muted for everybody, and we just ask that you stay muted, but we would encourage you to use the chat feature to say hello to one another, ask questions, add commentary as others talk. As always, the forum will be recorded and sent out to you after the forum. And as a heads up, today we actually have some media joining the forum, and they may use some of the recording in a news story, but just so y'all knew, they'll only be using the recording of folks who are speaking. So no one needs to like suddenly shut off their video or like, you know, run away and put on lipstick or anything like that. It'll just be Terry and Senator Westerfield and Representative Raymond. So again, we're taking comments and questions via the chat feature, and we'll pass those along as needed and follow up with you as needed. So Terry Brooks, our Executive Director, will be moderating today's conversation with Senator Westerfield and Representative Raymond. Welcome, Senator Westerfield and Representative Raymond. We're so excited that you could join us today. And thank you to all of the advocates and partners who submitted questions for today's forum for Senator Westerfield and Representative Raymond. Terry incorporated those into his questions, and then we passed some on to the legislature. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry, who is going to moderate the rest of our conversation.
Great. Well, thanks, Josie, and thanks to our partners for joining. I would say, Jesse, I don't think mentioned that we will be taking screenshots of anyone not paying attention, and that will be used in the news broadcast about this, so just kind of stay focused. You will recall that we have initiated these Wednesday virtual forums as a way to continue to talk about kids and COVID-19. We, for instance, have had, as you know, Secretary Friedlander. We have had key staff from Leader McConnell's office in working with them around COVID-4 crafting in Washington. Last week, we had administration officials as well as local partners around health. A preview next week, we have cabinet leadership and on the ground folks who will be joining us to talk about child welfare within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So today, we felt like that we needed to hit the pause on COVID explicitly and make sure that we did revisit what actually was a very important 2020 legislative session. As a reminder, if you listen to our podcast, we offered a retrospective from KYA's perspective on the 2020 session. We also have done a podcast with Representative Meade, and a podcast with Senator Neal will be aired later this week. So we've tried to give you know, a broad perspective on what that means. Today, we are really pleased to be joined by two real champions for children. Whitney Westerfield has been the state senator of the 3rd District of Kentucky, which is the Hopkinsville area, since 2013. I'm sure most of you know that he serves as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, where he has consistently launched really key and landscape changing measures around juvenile justice. He additionally has sponsored a number of Blueprint for Kentucky Kids bills that are outside of the justice arena. And in fact, our understanding is that, not that some of you know that I tend to be competitive and keep scores. I believe that Senator Westerfield is tied with Julie Rocky Adams for the most ever Children's Advocacy Day awards. So he actually, I think, has built a new shelf in his office just for those awards. So there is no question that when we talk about somebody we can depend on with kids, it's Whitney Westerfield. One of the absolute rising superstars for kids in the House is Josie Raymond. Representative Raymond represents the 31st District, which is part of Jefferson County. Since 2019, she serves on the House the House Health and Family Services Committee. What I find fascinating about Representative Raymond is her biography. She has been a student success coordinator at the University of Louisville, a middle school teacher, a journalist, and is a mom. So that's quite a combination. The other burden that Representative Raymond bears is I am her constituent. So you can imagine how much fun that is for her. So we want to kind of move into the discussion. And what I'd like to do is invite both Representative Raymond and Senator Westerfield to just kind of riff on the big picture. Before the session started, we thought it was going to be unprecedented. We have a Democratic governor and supermajority GOP factions in both the House and Senate. That's set up for an unusual situation. We were facing a big 2020 biennial budget. And that seems like a million years ago, doesn't it? Because right in the middle of it, we know the pandemic walked in and changed everything. So I'm wondering just some general takeaways and reflections. Whitney, do you want to start? And then Josie, you can follow up and we'll kind of keep flipping that order.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Terry. I appreciate the whole team and I appreciate everybody who's listening to the call this morning. Wow, what a weird session that I hope we never see another one like again. But I guess in terms of the biggest takeaways, I went and looked just a few days ago in preparation for this call, and I was looking at all the bills related to children, child welfare. And one thing that strikes me, there were a whole lot more bills than I was aware of being out there. And of course, I'm not paying attention to all the House bills unless they make it to the Senate. But one of my biggest takeaways, and I think this is a good thing, despite that the ugly way session ended and the truncated schedule we had and how difficult things got and how difficult they'll be in the future, child welfare is on the mind of a whole lot of legislators across party lines, across rural and urban districts. There's a bunch of legislation out there that affects, and I think most of it in a really positive way. Not all of it passed, obviously, but there's a whole lot of bills out there. In the neighborhood of 1,000 bills passed or filed, there were a whole bunch related to child welfare. I think NTI days could use some work. They weren't built for this. That's another big takeaway and something my constituents have talked to me about a little bit. And there was an article by, she's a conservative columnist, and she's not only a writer herself, but is also a stay-at-home mom and homeschool parent. And she talked about how big a shock this was for parents to make this adjustment, and how many things that we could be doing. And she gave a number of examples, things that we could be doing to help parents that aren't accustomed to doing this, that aren't in a mode of trying to educate their kids or teach kids in the same way that they might be getting education in the classroom every day during normal times. Those are just some of the things that super high altitude that are on my mind as we talk about children in the landscape that we're facing right now. Obviously, there were a whole lot of bills, but we can get into that here as we go.
Yeah, I do want to underscore what Senator Westerfield mentioned on Representative Mead's podcast. We naturally talked to him about child welfare, and
Sure.
He emphasized so strongly that was a common ground. He talked a lot about there was no one with whom he partnered more strongly than Joni Jenkins.
Yeah, Joni Jenkins,
and
absolutely.
I think we all know that on many issues, Representatives Mead and Jenkins do not see eye to eye. But when it comes to child welfare, they are arm in arm. So that, in an environment where so many folks talk about toxicity it's great to find that common ground. Representative Raymond, what are your reflections as you look back on 2020?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Terry. And I haven't gotten to know Senator Westerfield at all. So it's great to see you. And I want to thank you for your sort of public discussion of health, right? I really have appreciated that. But so this was just my second session. I was elected in 2018. So it was my first budget session. So I went in really eager to learn a whole lot. And I don't know if I got, well, I certainly didn't get the normal experience, but it was a weird session in so many ways. I had a baby in January, so I was out for a little bit, and then, many of you
because
saw
things weren't stressful enough for you.
saw me with the baby. Oh, it's pouring rain in Louisville, so. And then coronavirus hit, and then I got back and we were getting into the swing of things. I had a nanny coming with me to the Capitol, and then coronavirus hit. So very bizarre. But a few takeaways for me was that I felt a marked difference in the tone in relationships between Democrats and Republicans from 2019 to 2020. And I think the place that I saw this most clearly was in the House's first budget. We got the governor's recommendations, and then the House put forward its first budget, and they weren't too far apart, and I remember being in my caucus and everyone was saying, oh, this isn't horrible. We kind of like this. So that was something. And then, of course it got nasty toward the end, but I felt a lot more cooperation than I did last year. I also learned that where there's a will, there's a way. So, when I had my baby in January and we were discussing how I could continue to serve my folks here in the 31st district, remote voting, like voting from home, is off the table, right? But there was some discussion of, well, could I vote from this little nursery we put on the 4th floor of the Capitol, or could I vote from our sort of caucus hangout room across the hall? And the answer was no. Definitely not. Fast forward 6 weeks when everybody else needs to do it, and we passed the rule, and we were able to vote from our offices. So let's see if we can better support all of our members in the future when they're facing different sorts of obstacles. And then the third takeaway for me was just this absolute resistance to raising revenue. And this is not a revenue call, but there was one measure this year that raised revenue. It was a vaping tax. And between the House and the Senate, it even got watered down. And I'm just beating my head against the desk saying that we can't and won't move forward until we're investing in an educated and skilled and healthy workforce. And so other people, we can have debates between the parties, right, about whether the chicken and egg of do we attract business first or do we provide the skilled workforce first. But I was frustrated again at the resistance to raising revenue.
Great. Well, we're going to get into budgets because we know that we're facing a 2021 budget discussion and a 2022 budget discussion. But before we do this, because you guys have been gracious enough to join the call, I know that each of you have a couple sweet spots that frankly are also challenging. So I want to open by letting you have the floor to kind of talk about that sweet spot. Representative Raymond, I think if I have ESPN going today, you may be interested in talking about preschool. Our assessment of that is that it's a tough financial climb for a number of reasons, whether that's full day funding for kindergarten, the general revenue picture. But I do want you to have a chance to sort of use this as a platform to get folks thinking about where you'd like to see us going on preschool, the rationale, and kind of your hopes in the immediate and long term.
Yeah. I'm really not fun anymore because anytime anyone talks about any issue, I go, you know what would really help with that? Pre-K. And everyone's like, yeah, but it's true. And so I'll make my case. So I have been beating this drum for a couple of years since my very first day in office about pre-K for all. I think every 3 and 4-year-old in Kentucky deserves access to full day, high quality, state funded preschool in some form. And I am lucky to have a Republican partner in this effort. It's Representative Steve Sheldon from Bowling Green. He's also in his first term. And like you were talking about Representatives Meade and Jenkins, we disagree on a whole lot of things, right? But we couldn't be more aligned in our belief that preschool is going to absolutely change trajectories for kids and for families. So we talk about the benefits for children, right? And everybody on this call knows them. So many of you all are partners of mine and have educated me about the space. We know that kids are going to build their social emotional skills. We get to academic skills way down the line after we talk about health outcomes and learning soft skills, delayed gratification, and these sorts of things that we know are going to serve them. Then we talk about the benefits for the workforce. Our early childhood educators are almost all women and they're almost all underpaid. Then we start talking about benefits for the workforce and for the economy. What's it going to do when young mothers in particular are able to go back to work because their children are in a high quality care situation all day? And what's going to be the impact in 10 or 15 or 20 years when those pre-K kids grow up and they're skilled in so many ways and ready to enter and contribute to the workforce. So these are the sort of benefits we talk about. There's a big old price tag on it, a big old price tag to offer this to all of our families in Kentucky. And again, we just want to offer it. It wouldn't be mandated for anyone. Representative Sheldon and I are not, we're so passionate about it, but we're not the two people who can sit down and write the perfect bill to bring pre-K to every family in Kentucky. So that's why we've proposed a task force that would get all the experts together, including so many people who are on this call, and spend a year or two saying, what would it look like to offer this to all of our families? And then we can start getting into the nitty gritty, and there will be arguments, but everybody's willing to come to the table and have them about what is that big old price tag going to be, and then what's our return going to be.
Great, thanks. If we shift to Senator Westerfield, clearly his signature focus is around justice. As I alluded, the bill that he and then Representative Tilley crafted a few years ago, SB 200, is really seen as a national model for fundamental juvenile justice reform. From our take, Whitney, it seems as if we're now at a molasses pace stage on justice in general. We think about issues like bail reform. Kentucky has the second most kids in the nation with parents incarcerated. We know there are still key juvenile justice issues that you pay attention to, like racial disproportionality and the age of kids entering the system. And yet it seems like increasingly it's tough to go from talking about it to actionable items. So I'd really invite you to do two things. One is what's going on? What are the dynamics that seem to be precluding progress? And then you're a guy that is always optimistic and you approach things in a can-do attitude. Are there a couple issues and measures that you do believe have some traction that we could all help you on as we already are beginning to think about 2021?
Yeah, and we are thinking about 2021, where we'll be writing yet another budget before we come back in 22 and write yet another budget. But the work for 21 began for me at about 12:30 on the 16th, 12:30 a.m. when I put in my first bill request, made it DR number 1 for the 2021 session. And that is Senate Bill 87. That is the disproportionate minority contact effort that's very laser focused at the automatic transfer for YO kids. That's one of 2 or 3 places where we can make a policy change to reduce the disproportionate minority contact we have in the juvenile justice system. One of the places where young minority kids get hit more than white kids get hit by the system. That's probably the biggest thing on my mind as we head into 2021. There are a lot of different justice-related initiatives, almost all of which have an impact directly, if not indirectly, on youth. As you mentioned, Kentucky's the number 2 in the country with children with incarcerated parents. Every time we talk about criminal justice reform, big reform, whether it's bail reform proposals, and that is my 2-year-old banging on the window. Waited till just this minute to start doing that. Anytime we talk about juvenile or criminal justice policy, people often think about the felon that's being prosecuted in their hometown, or they think about their judge that's got to preside over it. They think about the prosecutor or the defense bar. Not very many people are thinking about the tangential and next level in the little rings of influence that those decisions have and the impacts they have on the families and the children involved in those families. And that's part of the conversation. One of the biggest impediments, you mentioned, what are some of the sticking points there you asked? People are worn out.
There's real fatigue, isn't it? Yeah.
There really is. Even using the word fatigue is being fatigued. That there's a strong reluctance to do anything that looks like it's being friendly to a bad guy. I mean, that's really it. We being the general consensus, not Whitney, but the general thought is we want to be tough. We want to lock them up. We want people to serve the sentences that they get. We want people to be punished for their crime. We want there to be a consequence for their bad behavior. And I think there's nothing wrong with wanting sentences to be meaningful. There's nothing wrong with there being a consequence. Obviously, there needs to be a consequence for behavior. And there's certainly nothing wrong with people not breaking the law again. But I think we need to look at our system and ask ourselves tough questions about whether or not we're actually achieving that. Both in the adult side and certainly on the juvenile side, are we getting those outcomes? Is that what are we seeing recidivism go up, or are we seeing it go down? Are we improving the behavior of children? Are we improving the lives of children by keeping people in custody? You brought up bail reform. There's a great chart. I'll send this to you. You can distribute it. I threatened AOC that I might tweet it out during session, but then everything got thrown to the wayside as COVID-19 came up. And so I didn't bother with it, but it really, in 2 bar graphs, demonstrates the bail reform problem. I asked them to break down, show me where we're holding people in terms of their level of bail. How many for Class D felons and Class C felons, your lowest levels and your next level up from that, and they can't have any holds, they can't have any warrants for some other county somewhere. So these are your non-serious offender people with no big histories. And there's just an enormous, when you look at the spectrum of dollar figures, there's this huge pool of people in the middle that are sitting there without being found guilty of a darn thing, and they just can't afford to get out. And so they're not at home. Right now, they're not at home teaching their kids or showing their kids how to do this or that, showing them how to ride a bike and playing with them out in the yard, or playing games with them at the table, or just spending time with them. They're not going to work. They're not paying their bills. They're not doing all the things that we have all taken for granted. And that comes at a cost. And we can speculate about what that cost is, but it's enormous. And we see its ripple effects in so many other things that we have to deal with, whether it's child welfare policy, just about everything CHFS has to do and deal with every day. Those are some of the things that we need to be mindful of and work on. And man, getting over that hurdle, that mental stumbling block for so many legislators is tough. Working on them one at a time and getting them to a point. And they all will do this. Even, I love Paul Hornback, but Paul sometimes is a little reluctant to see things my way on criminal justice issues. He sits right next to me in the Senate. I love Paul, and he is a great legislator and ag chairman. And Paul and I had an argument, this was a year ago, we had an argument about something related to some juvenile justice policy that I loved and he didn't like. And I said, Paul, at the end of the day, what do you want from the criminal justice system? Don't you want people do you want there to be a consequence, and you don't want them to come back, right? And he says, yes. Then we agree. We're on the same page. Let's talk about how best we can get to that point. It takes, and eventually I moved him just a little bit. And if that's all I can get, then that's something. The only one I don't have much hope for, bless his heart, is John Schickel. I don't think I can move John Schickel an inch, but I can move the others, and I'll keep trying.
Yeah, yeah. We do save money on children's awards in some places, so that's good.
Yeah.
An area that I think everybody on this call has been really frightened by the last couple of years is the broad discussion of public benefits. In a lot of ways, we've played defense about that. Again, our premise is that kids should not bear the brunt of public benefit restrictions. We've been encouraged that folks like Representative Mead, Representative Mosier have led discussions in the House around the idea that addiction, for instance, is a public health crisis,
Yes.
not a moral choice. And so we have seen the conversation get better, more focused, more research-based at the end of this session than it was at the beginning of 2019. But it still scares me because it seems like it's such a red meat rhetorical topic. So I'm wondering if
it could move negative in a hurry because of that very reason right there.
Can both of you talk back and forth a little bit about what are your concerns? What are your hopes? What's going on? How has this gotten such leverage the last couple of sessions? Whitney, you want to open this one, and then Josie jump in, and again, we'll kind of keep flipping the sequence.
I think you hit it. It's one of the things that, at least in the Republican caucus, it's one of the things we hear the most about. It's one of the things we get a lot of constituent feedback about, myself included. A general frustration amongst the people that reach out to us that there's massive fraud and abuse, fraud, waste, and abuse, and then it's rampant. It's in fact not very rampant, but the thought is that it is, and I think there's a general feeling or desire to want to appear as if we're doing something about that to improve and make more efficient the operation of government, to make it more lean, for the benefit of those people who actually do need the benefits. That's the argument, and it's persuasive. It's just like the tough on crime argument. Unfortunately, there are people who govern in that direct mail piece sort of mentality, and not the sit down conversation way. And frankly, it's a lazy way of legislating, because it's really easy to get in those grooves and to bang the drum and get people fired up about something that's really not the best approach to fixing a problem that you see, or it's not at all a big, huge problem that needs to be addressed or prevented. I think it's just easy for people to get caught up in that. And there's some people who firmly believe it. I think, and it leads to a bigger problem. Then I'll shut up. A bigger problem, and that's you still have a lot of legislators that don't care much about looking at data, that aren't concerned with finding objective evidence for or against any given policy point. So even when we've had that task force last year and we met, we heard people come in and speak. We heard data from our own cabinet. We heard data from outside stakeholder groups. We heard anecdotal data that it's not really as widespread as we all were made to believe. So I think that's another stumbling block, getting people to see the value of objective data and trusting it.
Yeah. Josie, what's your reflections? Do you agree that this is an emerging challenge for folks, and what do we do about that?
Well, certainly we saw it all year, and I think different groups felt threatened by the public assistance task force that was working last year, and then felt like the task force was actually looking at some issues. And then we saw House Bill 1, which I was extremely opposed to. I lodged a big no vote in committee. I agree completely with Senator Westerfield that we got to look at data, right, on all sorts of issue, whether it's voter ID or this public assistance fraud. But there's also this piece that I have seen missing in my 2 years there, which is just the humanity of it. So when you all are talking about juvenile justice, I'm thinking about my second day of teaching. I was in an alternative middle school in Indianapolis, and I had a 16-year-old in my 8th grade class, and his name was Justin, and he was wearing an ankle monitor. And I said, what you got that for? And he said, carjacking. And that was quite a second day of teaching for me. And so I think about Justin, and, you know, and he's talking about some people have this mentality of bad guys. You know, I'm all in for changing that up however we can, especially for young people, because I loved Justin. And then when it comes to things like House Bill 1, which we saw this last session, which was, you know, we were told it was going to address the public assistance benefits cliff, where people suddenly get a $2 an hour raise and then they don't qualify for the benefits that they've been using to support their family any longer. And we, you know, I was all in for that. And then we saw a bill that unfortunately would have instituted lifetime bans on things like SNAP, food stamps, and Medicaid if parents did something like sold their EBT card 2 times. And so in my remarks on the floor, I said, we're hearing about fraud, when really it's a single mom making a mistake, or it's a single mom making a choice that feels absolutely necessary to her in that moment. And fraud, I think, is a sort of male piece, black and white, a scary term that demonizes people, demonizes the poor. The other point I wanted to make about it was, you know, we heard so much from Representative Mead about, you know, we've taken these steps to avoid an impact on children. You know, we've been really intentional about making sure that this won't harm children. And I said, if you have worked so hard to be intentional to ensure that this doesn't harm children, you kind of think and you kind of know that it might and that it will. So that was really disappointing to me. I was a poor kid with parents who made bad decisions. So those were the kids that I had in mind when we were voting on that bill. So my hope, though, is that the coronavirus, and I know we're going to get to this, but my hope is that this has laid bare some of the cracks in our society, you know, that we've known have been there for a long, long time. But they're affecting people that we know better, and they're affecting our families in certain ways. And we'll have a better understanding and more empathy toward these sorts of challenges.
Yeah. You know, there's a great quote from Mencken who says there's a clear answer for every complex problem. It's always very simple and always very wrong. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of what we see going on with public benefits. Representative Raymond, you obviously have cheated and read my script because you opened the next question, which is we can't begin to talk about the General Assembly without talking about the pandemic and whether we're in the middle of it or post-pandemic or second wave or wherever we are when January 2021 comes. You kind of suggested, which is certainly what we're hoping, is that there may actually be some positive lessons, positive takeaways, positive perspectives. I've heard that lens from folks who talk out of an economic perspective, folks who talk out of a faith-based perspective, out of a K-12 perspective. So I'm asking both of you to dust your crystal balls off, and we won't hold you to it. But if you were to suggest some hopes, maybe not realities yet, but are there some positives that you hope Kentucky and sort of the way that the General Assembly is looking at issues that might emanate from this unprecedented crisis?
I'll go, and these are ramblings from the super minority, but I'm more afraid than I am hopeful. I think we all know now that without childcare, life as we know it, the American economy screeches to a halt. And so I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a newborn. And you know, life is very different than it was 3 months ago. So it's my hope that now it has been made even more clear to us how important childcare is for our families and for others. So there was discussion this past session of, you know, working on CCAP to ensure that more families have access to childcare. And I hope that's something we can revisit. Of course, school is childcare. When I talk about pre-K, I talk about the benefits for kids. Parents need some place for them to go. parents need a safe place for them to go for 8 hours or more. And that's why when we talk about pre-K, we talk about we need a full day program, because, you know, parents can't come get them at 1:30 in the afternoon. So stuff that's good for kids, of course, is good for adults, and vice versa. But I'm really afraid that, you know, of course, we just passed the 1-year budget, so we're going to pass a second year, 1-year budget next year, and it's going to be ugly, isn't it, Whitney? It's going to be real ugly. Yeah. You know, a tight budget is education cuts. A tight budget is cuts to the social safety net, because there's no other choice. I'm really afraid that when I show up in January 2021, we'll be back to normal, you know, and we'll be debating bills that I feel are anti-immigrant or anti-poor or anti-woman. And I'll think, did we learn nothing from the global pandemic, right? When Kentucky was shut down for months last year. So those are some of my big fears. And then, you know, thinking about House Bill 1, public assistance that we talked about, and going into next year, it's just a pet peeve of mine when we separate children's issues and adult issues. Like children are not, you know, being raised by adults, and that everything that they're experiencing, whether it's economic hardship or anxiety or mental health concerns, is not trickling down.
Senator?
I appreciate those comments, Josie. It's hard to find a silver lining on this cloud, but I think. Well, I don't know. You asked to look at our crystal ball. I'm not even going to try that. I know economically we're not going to have the revenue that we hoped and expected we'd have. Even the 1-year budget we just passed is based on revenue projections I don't think we're going to hit, which means when we come back, it's going to be really ugly. It's going to be an unpleasant exercise in crafting a budget. And Josie's right. Budget cuts means cuts to the budget, and education's in the budget, pensions are in the budget, every manner of government service is in the budget, and we have to find ways to not cut things that we need to not cut. But that means everybody else has to be cut more. It's challenging, and I do not look forward to that. Having said that, one small, tiny sliver of a hope that I do have is that sometimes really drastic things can compel action in unexpected ways. And sometimes that can be really positive. No one wants us to have to endure something very challenging to beget that positive change. But if that's something good that can come out of it, then that's a positive thing. My mind, unsurprisingly, goes to criminal justice and incarceration and things in that universe of policy. And there are a number of things that this pandemic has forced us to do. We're all doing this Zoom call right now. But the courts are doing Supreme Court arguments by Zoom or by video conference of some variety. It may change permanently the way that we go about doing some of the things that we do. COVID-19 and coronavirus showing up in our correctional facilities, though a lot of the populations are down because of what the Supreme Court, the governor's order and the Supreme Court's order, and even local courts' orders have resulted in a lot of reduction in population in a lot of different places, maybe not everywhere, but Kenton County, for instance, I was speaking with Kenton County's attorney, Stacy Tapke, last week on a conference call, and their population had been basically cut in half in their county jail because of the various orders that have resulted in release. It might when you see that population of people being released, we're going to be looking at the data from those counties where we've seen that. What if it turns out all those people maintained healthy, crime-free lives while they were out of custody? Maybe that's a data picture that helps move the needle, if ever only slightly, a little bit, but moves the needle a little to demonstrate that there's a way for people that are facing criminal charges to not be in and still contribute meaningfully to their family and then await the disposition of their case. Maybe this, and goodness, we'll be talking about coronavirus for the next 50 years, whether it's the things that are happening right now in the immediate sense, whether it's talk about fraud, waste, and abuse. I'm betting there are people who have gotten big companies and things that didn't need the PPP loans that have gotten it from the SBA that got it, and where that money's being spent. And we'll be talking about it for our lifetimes. But I hope that in ways that we've had to change so drastically in such a short period of time, maybe it causes us to change our perspective a bit. Just yesterday, it was a Twitter moment that was trending. I get a lot of my news from Twitter anymore, every day. And I'm following all kinds of people from the left, the right, and the middle. But this has nothing to do with politics. But the Trolls movie, the new Trolls movie, World Tour, made more in the first 3 weeks here being available through a digital distribution through streaming than the first Troll movie made in 5 months in the theaters. I wouldn't have predicted that, and my household contributed to that. And not every movie is a Trolls movie, and not every movie is going to appeal to the family that way. So the environment's different, but it's going to change the way things are seen and the way we approach things. And I think we should take advantage of that and make changes wherever we can to improve the lives of Kentuckians.
I'm wondering, we've got just about 5 or 6 more minutes. One of the things that I frankly worry about is that so many folks on this call are so skilled and committed when it comes to kids and family issues. It would be pretty easy for us to kind of sit on our hands and say, well, we're going to have to wait to see where it goes, the financial realities that y'all have talked about. I have to tell you, I tend to take a counterintuitive view. Both of you have talked about there still could be opportunities, especially on non-budget issues. Can you give some coaching to folks who are on this call? And candidly, nobody on this call is a rookie. We have very sophisticated, gifted and talented. They're all in the gifted and talented advocacy class. So help us think a little bit as we sit here this spring. What should we be doing? What can we do now, knowing all the ambiguities in the landscape? What should we all be doing now, thinking about kids and policy and interacting with legislators?
I interact with the legislator. Don't waste time. As I said, I got BR number 1 for the first time ever with Senate Bill 87. This year, Senate Bill 87. I make those contacts and build those relationships. And I assume most of the people paying attention or watching this call are in the Louisville area, but maybe they're spread out.
No, they're really spread out. Yeah, they are, Senator.
Well, if you don't go and seek out your senator and your representative or representatives for your county, you have an in with them more than you have with anybody else because they belong to you. And build those relationships and cultivate a sense of trust between you so that when you can advocate for the policies that you need and want to, and you all know what the policies are that are of interest to you, you have that level of trust built up. That's always my first bit of advice when dealing with legislators, because people underestimate the value of constituent input and feedback. Even on issues that are politically unpopular or that are counter to what you think a Republican would like or a Democrat would like, the power of constituent input can be greater than just about anything else. And every legislator is different. Some data doesn't appeal to most of them, but it appeals to some of us. Sometimes the warm and fuzzy story does the trick. Sometimes a family connection does the trick. And if you think a legislator's family is not touched by all the policies we've talked about and some of these others in some way, you're missing it. There's a contact in there somewhere. There's a way to make that connection, to make that issue real, and to bring them over to your side on an issue. All of that's built on trust, and it's tough to do that when you can't go sit in their office right now or go find them at their house. But that'll change. and make those inroads. And if they won't come see you, or they won't reach out to you or answer a phone call, then reach out to me or Josie, and we'll fuss at them and get them to take your call.
Representative Raymond.
Yeah, I was going to say, you all aren't rookies, but I am, right? So we got a handful of know-it-alls in Frankfurt, but I'm certainly not one of them. So
or a couple of handfuls.
The people on the call who've helped me in my understanding of what preschool could look like across Kentucky over the last couple of years. I'm so grateful to you all for educating me, and to everyone else. I'm seeing comments about pre-release things that I don't know about and I don't understand, but I certainly want to be useful on. And so I would say, please continue to educate me and my colleagues. So many of us from Louisville in particular are new to the legislature. And think about how people can be allies from each party. Right. Of course, Republicans have the chairmanships, but I think Democrats can be useful in certain ways. Right. I'm not going to carry a blueprint bill next year, probably. But I think, folks could always come to me, and I always want to be open and useful and available. If you say, hey, could you work on Whitney on this? Or, you're tight with Steve Sheldon. Could you go down the hall and, see if you can get somewhere with him on this? That's a strategy I've not seen used much, but I'd like to start employing it. And then the second thing, like Whitney said, organize constituents. I feel like I'm from a pretty sleepy district over here. So I'm always comparing with my colleagues, how many calls do you get on that? How many emails do you get on that? When we try different things to activate folks, of course, Whitney's got 3 times the size of the population. But, if I'll get 10 personal emails about something, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. So I'm trying. So that's what I would say. I just put my contact info over here in the chat, and I'd love to work with anybody for the rest of the year.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. There's a wonderful quote from Jim Rohn, who is a sort of a startup entrepreneur. The challenge of leadership is to be strong but not rude, to be kind but not weak, to be bold but not a bully, to be humble but not timid, to be proud but not arrogant, to have humor but without folly. Senator Westerfield, Representative Raymond, you both really personify that quote, and I think all of us so appreciate the presence and the voice that you bring to kids. Thanks for taking time to be with us today. To close out, I've asked Courtney Downs from KYA to kind of wrap things up, summarize, and give us our marching orders. So again, Josie, Whitney, thanks so much. Courtney, go ahead and take it.
Okay, thanks, Terry. And thank you so much to Senator Westerfield and Representative Raymond for taking the time to join us today. It's so important for advocates and really the public in general to be able to hear from you and to hear about the topics that we covered today. So we appreciate how gracious you all have been and receptive to always, inviting feedback and engaging in these types of conversations. And perhaps more importantly, we want to thank all of the Blueprint for Kentucky Children's partners and other advocates who are able to join us today. We know that you all are probably busier now with work and with your families. So we really appreciate you being part of this advocacy and learning community. So as Terry said in his opening, Senator Westerfield and Representative Raymond are 2 legislators who have really proven that we can count on them when it comes to being champions for children. We heard that the child welfare continues to be on the minds of a lot of legislators and that it's an area of common ground. We heard a steadfast commitment to remembering the families and the children who are impacted by the justice system when it might be easier to be more laser focused on being tough on crime. And we heard, maybe a small sliver of hope that on the other side of this pandemic, we may see more empathy around the needs of Kentucky families, and that this crisis may inspire some positive change in more unexpected ways. So we had some great questions also that were asked in the chat again this week. So we will follow up on any of the ones that we didn't get to, and we will contact each of you individually. And next Wednesday at 10 a.m., we will be taking a closer look at the child welfare workforce. So DCBS Deputy Commissioner Elizabeth Kaywood and a few other panelists will be joining us. So we hope that you all will be able to join again as well. And thank you all, as always, for continuing to join us.
Thanks. Thank you all so much.
you, everyone. Bye.